Podcasts are an excellent medium for sharing thoughts, but what thoughts do we have about those thoughts? Hello, and welcome to Rewind. I'm your host, Frank Macri, and I'm here to talk about three different podcasts that I have recently listened to. I'll explain the gist of them one by one and let you know if you should press play on them or skip it entirely. All three podcasts come from Radiolab, and we have three very different topics to discuss. Without further ado, let's get started with our first podcast. First podcast I'd like to talk about is Hello, which is it had a very interesting opening about people wanting to use AI to translate animal communication. And animal communication is something that I didn't think was possible because I never looked too much into it. But this podcast is great. It has it's really well prepared. There's eyewitnesses with the research who talk directly about their firsthand experience with their studies. It has a narrative structure following a woman named Margaret, and the narrative kind of narrows down from the intro because it goes about talking from the whole animals kingdom to dolphins, which are very intellectual, as I knew before the podcast, but this does make sure to very explain. The one thing I will give about this is that the intro, it doesn't quite get to it immediately. The beginning parts feel very jumpy, and there's a lot of sound effects and cuts to the voice clips, and there's a lot of times where it just doesn't feel like straight coherent dialogue, especially at the very beginning. But, I bared with it, and I think it was around the 10-minute mark that I started really getting invested. I mean, you hear about these interesting experiments, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's some there's some ugly parts about some of these experiments, but the whole idea of human and animal communication is very fascinating. And again, it takes a minute for the listening to become really enjoyable, at least for me immediately. But the story is just so interesting that I think digging through that all is very worth it, and I'll press play on it. I'd say press play. Something you should definitely listen to. The second one I listened to, I gotta be honest, I didn't have high hopes for it, but the subject matter I kind of had to listen to. Called Science versus the Funniest Joke in the World, and again, I mean, I know there's no funniest joke in the world, but comedy is such an influential part of my life that even though I had low expectations, I felt like I had to listen to it anyway. I just felt obligated because of who I am. And I mean, the intro's kind of vague. Uh, you know, I will say the dialogue felt natural. Sometimes some of the speakers did make me laugh occasionally, and the sound design is really good. Nothing really felt interrupted. I felt like I could really hear the people talk. But it kind of goes nowhere. The intro's very vague. Felt very open ended. It felt like they were trying to follow a story but kept running around in circles. I mean, they there is science about humor in general that they explained, which is kind of interesting because again, I really do care about laughter and comedy. But I don't know if it's because I went into it with low expectations. I was hoping to be pleasantly surprised, but I wasn't. It's just running around in circles for a really long time. There's a little bit of good, but it's not worth it. And what good there is has nothing to do with the title. So I'd say skip it. No, the third one, I saved the best for last because this is easily my favorite. I'm just going to say press play before I introduce it. It's called Shell Game, and Shell Game is fascinating. There's this guy, right? And what it's about, he trained this voice bot AI, Chat GPT, whatever, a lot of fancy AI terms, to basically be him. He put all his data into this AI and has a voice, sounds very similar to his, obviously still a little unnatural and robotic, but a lot better than AI was years ago, and shows how he employed this trained voice bot into these different parts of his life. Like he scheduled appointments with a therapist and had the AI speak instead of him, or legal meetings or job meetings. And there was no time wasted at all. It went straight into the good stuff and never felt like, oh, it's interesting, it's not interesting. No, I was sucked in the whole time. I almost forgot to take notes. I was just so engaged in listening to this, and it does cut away from the conversation a lot, but it's every time there's a cutaway to a separate conversation, it's always like a prior experience of the AI speaking with someone, and just hearing AI have like these so close to natural human conversations. It was great. And it had kind of a lighthearted tone sometimes, but it still stayed very serious. And it told the story but still delivered commentary on AI and its future and its implications. Like, there was a moment where it talked about like the CEO of Zoom wanting like AI in voice meetings to be the future. So there's some lighthearted moments, some very serious moments, a good narrative, and good commentary. I think AI in general is very fascinating, but the way that this podcast talked about it, it's prop. I don't listen to podcasts too often, but this is easily one of, if not my favorite. So I would give a definite press play to Shell Game. I mean, this thing, I think it's awesome. So those are the three podcasts I have to talk about today. And this is Frank Macri, signing off of Rewind.